Wonderful. Representative Tipton.
Just got on.
Fantastic. Welcome. President Brown.
Here.
President Zarapata.
Present.
President Morgan.
Here.
President Jackson.
Here.
President Vadia.
Here.
President Capilouto.
Here.
President Benapudi.
Here.
President Caboni.
Here.
Wonderful. Have a great meeting.
Thank you, Heather. Welcome, everybody, to a Friday afternoon meeting. This was one of our special called meetings because we felt like we needed an extra meeting to try to get as many things completed as possible. Today, we're going to try to go a long way in doing that. You got the PowerPoint. We're not going to start from the beginning because you saw a lot of that at our last meeting. Our last meeting is scheduled for December 2nd. I know that's a couple of days after we get back from Thanksgiving, even though back from Thanksgiving is a little bit different than this year than in the past. We're really hoping to get some decisions today, as much consensus as possible. We understand maybe not everybody will agree, but we do have to have this report finished fairly soon. And I sent to you some decision points that I heard from the presidents, at least most of you, that you thought would be a good place for us to start as a template. You've gotten those, you've looked at those. What I'm going to ask Bill to do, and we're going to move through some of these slides fairly fast. So if there's reasons why you want to stop and discuss, please feel free to do that. But please understand, by the end of today, we hope to have some sense of how we will finish all of this up in summation at the December 2nd meeting. If there's a reason or a need to call for another meeting, we probably have a week or two after that, we could work something in. So if just as Budget Director Hicks said last time, we need another meeting, we call this, we're happy to listen to your will in this case and call another if needed. But any questions before we get started?
Aaron, just a quick heads up. This is Neely Bendapudi. That when I step off, our budget director, Rick Grace-Eric, is on the call and will be happy to speak for me.
Thank you, Dr. Bendapudi. That will be noted. So, Bill, I'm going to ask you to kind of do a quick summation from where we were at last time. Let's fairly quick, and then let's get to some of the items that are currently on the agenda. Everybody's able to see the agenda, don't need to read it to you, but we're just going to jump into it.
Thank you, President Thompson. As you just indicated, the slide presentation that we have today is very similar. 95% of it is the same as the slide presentation that we shared at the last meeting, with one or two minor changes. If you'll just back up one slide, Heather. And of course, this is the agenda for today. What has changed on the agenda from the last meeting? We had this number 1 labeled proposal from Murray State University, but that was actually from President Jackson as convener of the presidents on behalf of several other campus presidents. And so now we have reworded that statement of recommendations, which is very much a draft at this point. And you do have, I'll just hold it up. You've got a 1-pager in your packet that contains that statement of recommendations. And I've gone ahead and summarized it on the next 2 slides. The major decision points under number 2, that is exactly the same as the last meeting. And as I said, about 95% of the slides throughout this presentation are the same as the presentation from the last meeting. We made it through item E, 2E, premiums for underserved populations. At the last meeting, we did not get into item F, waiting between the sectors. But that statement of recommendations really focuses on letters A, B, and C under major decision points. The stop loss going forward, the modified small school adjustment, and the percent of formula share approach. And if you'll go to the next slide, Heather, there's been one or two minor changes in that regard too. As you may recall from our last meeting, that there was only one option at the beginning, and that was to adopt the 0% stop loss in 2021-22. And the purpose of that is so that no institution would have a loss of general fund as a result of running the model. And as you know, if you have a 0% stop loss, that means there's no carve out of the institutional base and no funds in terms of campus contributions would be put into the post-secondary education performance fund. But now what you see is an option 2, which is adopt a 1% stop loss in 2021-22. And the purpose of the 1% stop loss is it limits that potential redistribution of funds among institutions relative to like a 2 or a 3% stop loss. Any level of stop loss is going to limit the potential redistribution of funds among institutions, but I'm sure as all of you know, a 1% stop loss would limit that more so than a 2% stop loss. And so that was a new option that several presidents wanted put on the table, and it was communicated to me through the CBOs of those institutions. And of course, you know, the rationale for that is, you know, in the event that there's no new funding authorized by the General Assembly, that 1% stop loss, you know, does not redistribute as much funding as the 2% stop loss would. This third bullet on this slide is the same as the bullet from the previous meeting. Implement a 2% stop loss in 2022-23, and then just continue it in perpetuity from that point on. Next slide, Heather. And this is something new. It had been proposed at the last meeting to eliminate those fiscal cliffs at KSU, Moorhead, and Murray by increasing that small school adjustment. But what has changed, there's now a proposal on the table to use a phased in approach so that you don't do that all in 1 year, but over 2 years. And that would be accomplished by increasing that small school adjustment by an amount equal to half of each institution's current year hold harmless. And of course, the current year is 2020-21. So you take half of that hold harmless from the current year, and you would add that to the small school adjustment for next year. And then in the year after that, in 2022-23, you would take 100% of the current year hold harmless allocation and add that to the small school adjustment. And that would then be fixed from that point forward. And so that would allow you to eliminate those fiscal cliffs over a 2-year time frame instead of doing it all in 1 year. And there were a couple of presidents, again, working through their CBOs that asked that we consider using this phased in approach. Lastly, Murray State University was the first institution that put on the table this notion of using a percent of formula share approach to distribute performance funds. And their thinking was that that is something that would allow CPE staff some flexibility if it were written into budget bill language, or if there was a modification in the statute to say if there were no new funding from the state, or more importantly, if the state did not put in enough additional appropriations to either equal or exceed total stop loss contributions within the university funding model, then we would use this percent of share formula approach to distribute those funds. And again, it has the effect of limiting that potential redistribution among institutions, because if there is new money put into the performance funding model, and if it's, you know, of an amount that's $15 million or above, which is roughly equivalent to the 2% stop loss contribution, that new money in and of itself helps limit redistribution among institutions. Because the first 15 million in additional appropriations put in by the state is used to reward those institutions that on the majority of the metrics have achieved performance above average on a majority of the metrics. And then the second 15 million, that's the carve out from the institutions, is essentially going to be distributed using a percent of formula share approach, because that's one of the steps in the model. That percent of formula share is step 4 in calculating how funds are to be distributed in the current performance funding model. So this would only kick in if the amount of state support did not equal or exceed the total stop loss contribution authorized by the General Assembly. This last bullet on this slide is new, and a number of the presidents at a recent president's meeting indicated that they really just felt like, number one, that there was not sufficient time to give a thorough examination of all of the proposed changes to the funding model between now and the end of the year. And at the same time, most of the presidents indicated that they're actually dealing with quite a bit right now with the resurgence of this COVID-19 pandemic, and trying to make decisions about what to do this coming spring semester. And so that's, I think, what is driving this recommendation to say, let's get accomplished what we can in this iteration of the post-secondary education working group in terms of this statement of recommendations. And then maybe let's come back and reconvene in the summer and address a number of these other proposed changes that have come out either in the surveys of performance funding that CPE did this past summer, or in the summary statements that we've received from each of the institutions. There are a number of changes, and they're actually listed in the next step section of this presentation. And so I think there's a little bit of an idea that there's not enough time to address all of those sufficiently in this meeting and one more meeting in early December. So let me just stop right there. We'll actually go on to the next slide, Heather. The first decision that needs to be made, yeah, go ahead, Heather, next slide, is what are we going to do in terms of the stop loss going forward? And as I said earlier, that one-page statement of recommendations talks about the stop loss next year, and then the stop loss the year after that and going forward. It makes proposals about the modified small school adjustment and the percent of formula share approach. And we've gone through these slides, so go ahead to the next slide, Heather. I'm not going to plow new ground. On that previous slide, go back one or two. I'll just say this, Heather. Right, yeah, right there. This is just some background information, definitions coming from the statute itself, but that bottom bullet is very important. Everyone knows that unless the General Assembly takes action, go to the next slide, Heather. Yeah, that first bullet, unless the General Assembly takes action, that we've got 3 universities and 6 KCTCS institutions that are facing some rather severe fiscal cliffs next year. Next slide, Heather. And we shared this at the last meeting. There are those fiscal cliffs. And I've got video covering up part of what I'm looking at. At K-State, 6.8 million or an estimated budgetary impact of negative 38%. Hazard Community and Technical College, 3.5 million or a minus 32% budgetary impact. Southeast Community College, 2.2 million or a 23% budgetary impact. So that's the urgency that we have to get something accomplished in terms of the stop loss for next year. Next slide, Heather. And of course, in terms of the stop loss in 2022-23 and going forward, I'll just remind everybody that the majority of the institutions indicated a preference for a 2% stop loss percentage, both among the public universities and the KCTCS presidents. Next slide, Heather. So here's where we are. A decision needs to be made. What is the level of stop loss, if any, that we want for next year? And what do we want to do for 2022-23 going forward? I had provided this, again, as just a resource document so that each president could look and see, what is my contribution at a 1% stop loss level? What is my contribution at a 2% stop loss level? And of course, if you do not make a decision to eliminate the fiscal cliff for KSU and Moorhead and Murray, At a 1% stop loss level, KSU is going to contribute $182,000. Moorhead's going to contribute close to $350,000 next year. And those are dollars that they're not going to earn back. They're just, there's too wide an amount of disequilibrium between those two institutions and the other for them to have any likelihood of earning those funds back. Same thing at a 2% stop loss level. KSU is contributing $365,000, Moorhead close to $700,000. And again, those are dollars that they're very likely not going to earn back. Next slide, Heather. So this is what we would like to do today, is just stimulate some discussion among this group. Number one, do the majority or all of the work group members support the use of a stop loss provision going forward? If so, what should that level of stop loss be next year? And what should it be in 2022, 23 and beyond? And I'm going to stop talking there. And Aaron, I'm going to let you take over and lead the discussion.
Thank you, Bill. And we're going to do it in a way beyond discussion. We want to discuss, but I like to do it in a way of thinking about some proposed way of getting some answers here, because we could talk about this for the next 100 years, I guess. So I guess I would be interested in hearing something coming from somebody. We gave you some suggestions with a 0, 1, and 2. I'd be anxious to hear what people have thought about, what you'd like to see, and see if we can get some consensus as soon as we possibly can.
President Thompson, this is Representative Tipton. I've got a question for Dr. Payne on his presentation. We had the stop loss provisions, I understand that. Went through the additional small school adjustment. If you go with the additional small school adjustment, would not that change a lot of the numbers in the stop loss?
Sorry, I was muted. Yes, if you go with a modified small school adjustment to begin to eliminate that fiscal cliff, either do it all in 1 year or phase it in, whatever would be the preference of the group, that is going to help to limit redistribution among institutions, just like adopting a 1% stop loss would limit redistribution among institutions also. But if your question is, could there be a larger stop loss and at the same time eliminate the fiscal cliff, and would that in effect limit some redistribution? The answer to that question is yes.
I'm going to follow up real quick here, and I'm just going to ask a question for the group here. It looks like we've got two proposals on the table here, and for the presidents, is your preference to go with an additional stop loss, or would your preference be to go with the additional small school adjustment or a combination? So I'm interested to hear your comments on that.
Chair Tipton, this is Bob Jackson. From our standpoint, both items are important. I mean, we have a small fiscal cliff, but at the same time, in this tremendous year of uncertainty, and like everyone else, we're doing budget planning right now for the next fiscal cycle. It's been a tough 8 or 9 months. I mean, we would propose a 0% stop loss for the year that we're in, just because of the uncertainty. I mean, we can't afford, without tremendous additional cuts as we made last year of several millions, to do that again. And that would protect us for this 1 year and that 1 year only. And that's really all I'm speaking to. The fiscal cliff component, I think, is separate and apart, and is vitally important, and it's something that we should put in place, and we would be for phasing it in as has been suggested by many.
Representative Tipton, this is President McFadden. I echo Dr. Jackson's thoughts on that issue. So as it relates to the small school adjustment, obviously it has a unique impact on 3 of the institutions. The stop loss has an impact on all of the institutions. And as Bill indicated earlier, the stop loss is funded by the institution's base appropriation. So I think that the concern for us is if there is no stop loss provision, some ceiling that, what's at risk is being funded by the institutions. And so that has a complicated kind of budgeting nuance to it, which would say, how much do we have to hold back to understand what we would have to fund if we don't hit our metrics?
Other responses to Representative Tipton's statement?
Representative Tipton, I think your question is the most important one. We have a series of options in front of us. Excuse me for stepping back, but all of this made me think of the discussions we had when we conceived this. I believe our principles at that time were focused on more graduates for Kentucky, because we'd have more educated people, more innovative Kentucky, more prosperous Kentucky, and we embedded in the formula ways to have a more equitable Kentucky, focusing on those whose access to higher education had been less traditionally. I feel like through a series of all these steps, we're focusing on protecting universities, which may be important, but I feel like the best way to protect universities is what we all, I think, have agreed on, and that would be new funding. That's what makes these models work. If everybody realizes you have an opportunity to gain in some way, then that keeps people encouraged and in the game. If we worry about doing all of these things, we start neutralizing or weakening the model, we embed it into the formula and in legislation, and over time, it loses its impact. I remember when we had presentations about what other states were doing, and I remember anecdotal information, certain states, when they reach the juncture where we are, there's always something. Something comes up in the budget after you've conceived this, and states then started adjusting the formula over time, and I believe they lose their effectiveness. And the awkward position we're all in, and certainly, our university is focused on more graduates as a North Star. It puts us in the awkward position of saying the way we're going to solve no new funding is weaken the formula that has driven our behavior here. Every Friday afternoon, we have 70 people at least who focus on student success. They comb through data. They attack whatever problem we see during the week. And that group is somewhat daunted now because COVID is affecting all of us. It's a new challenge that affects students, faculty, and just like it affects all those constituents you represent. I worry about sending the signal to them that we're going to neutralize this funding formula. So my concern, with great sensitivity, I understand the legislature making a judgment about the amount of the stop loss depending on what they see as funding capabilities. I worry about a sequential series of adjustments that could water down the impact of this formula. And if you don't keep it over time, it's less regarded. You don't keep some set of rules. If you're adjusting every 2 years, I worry about that from a policy point of view.
Thanks, Eli. Senator Givens, looks like you've got your self unmuted.
I do, and I'll share some quick thoughts, and probably good to follow Representative Tipton with these thoughts, and then also to follow President Capilouto. If we could back up to the slide that had A through F on it. I think Bill made a really good point, and we've known all along that there's a lot of interplay between the pieces. And that was the crux of what I think Representative Tipton was asking.
It's other direction, Heather, I'm sorry.
That works. I think that one worked.
I apologize. Is this the one that you're looking for that had the different options?
If we can imagine A through F beside each of those, A, B, C, D, E, and F. A thought to stimulate some conversation, and this is going to be something that I haven't discussed with anyone, and there's no pride of authorship. And it's always dangerous, except for Sunday school class, it's always dangerous to hold out ideas that you don't know the answer to. But imagine that we add a G at the bottom, and the G would change it from review in 2021 to another 3-year period. So we'd have then A through G on the screen, and G would be the group comes back together, mandated in statute in 3 years. What I'm preparing to suggest reflects some thoughts that just occurred to me as I was hearing the conversations. And it goes along the lines of when we initially did this, many of you remember, I know President Thompson and President Capilouto do at least, we leveraged the institutions to the table to have this conversation by putting 25% or some amount of the money, it was around $40 million total, in a lockbox and said, we can't open the box until we have a solution. I'm going to turn the tables with my suggestion, and I'm going to suggest we consider leveraging the General Assembly to support the formula by forcing new funding for the formula to work. Now, Eli, that goes a little bit against what you just suggested, but follow me on the rest of the suggestion. If we eliminate A, we eliminate B, we eliminate C, no stop loss, no modified school adjustment, we keep what we got, no percent of formula share approach. The formula basically stays the same. In addition, we eliminate F, no weighting between sectors. We stay where we are in essence, but we commit to saying that we're going to set the floor. Nobody's budget level of state support goes below what it is today. That would leverage the General Assembly to say, if we're going to do this, which we see it's working, we've got to put new money in. That would sure get us to not having as many questions to answer, if nothing else.
Heather, can you pull up that one-page statement of recommendations? Because I think that's what Senator Givens was referring to is, it's kind of like a menu. I'm talking about the one page, not the PowerPoint.
So while
Yes, give me one moment. Sorry.
while we're trying to pick that up, let me, Aaron, if I may, just add a comment on what Senator Givens just said, and to follow up with both Representative Tipton and Eli. I think this is a very intriguing option that Senator Givens has put on the table. And I would certainly want to spend a little bit of time reflecting on what he said. To be honest, I like the simplicity of the approach. I like the idea of leveraging this to get additional money from the General Assembly. I think that's what all of us are in agreement with, that it doesn't really, the whole purpose of this model was to incentivize model. And I would be cautious about making the kinds of adjustments we're talking about now, just as Eli has stated, without really looking at some, because I think there are so many other aspects to this that we could keep nitpicking and figuring it out. And as you heard from across the table here, and I think made that statement probably more often than most, being mindful of the fact that NKU has a small other issue of the pension to deal with in the next couple of weeks. So what Senator Givens has put on the table is something I would very much like to reflect on and think a little bit about. We do have one more meeting in December. As it turns out, it also falls on the same day as my Board of Regents meeting, when we are going to make some decisions about the pension. But I really think that that's something to consider. And I find it extremely intriguing. And I think there are some aspects of simplicity that I feel are absolutely worthy of consideration. When I looked at this draft statement, that bill that you have on the front here, I essentially, in my mind, and since I've been advocating for this, kind of said, you know, I can certainly see supporting number 1 and number 2, some variation of 2, and then really skipping to 6 at this point, thinking that, you know, we don't want to make these minor adjustments. And if there is a way to reconvene in the summer to really think about some other aspects, when hopefully we'll have some clearer heads and a little bit more time on our hands, would be happy to do this. But I think Senator Givens has given us an option to consider, and I would very much like to reflect on that as well.
And I want to just throw a couple of things in. What Senator Givens is proposing is this bill, but with one added item, to eliminate the weighting. What he has proposed, I think, is I don't want to say a simplistic, Senator Givens, because I think it's a little more complicated than that. But it's really interesting when you think about the leverage part. And I think that's an important piece of the conversation we've all been having, that we feel like we haven't, and I'll just say this in front of everybody, the higher education has responded, even in times of no funding and cutting of funding for a lot of valid reasons. I'm not denying that we've responded, and the performance funding model has helped us to respond. But we've got to continue, if we're going to continue to respond, we know that we're going to have funding. We just have to. That's not a statement of saying replace all the stuff we've been cut. That's not that statement. This is a statement saying we've lived up to the agreement. So what Senator Givens, if I'm correct, Senator Givens, you'll correct me if I'm not. Your argument is, okay, here's your base. Once again, let's figure out how we can leverage that for you folk, Representative Tipton and yourself and your colleagues, and the governor's office. That's why I'm interested in hearing what John Hicks has to say, to put funding in this model. Am I correct in that what you are saying?
Yes, the meeting agenda might be the easiest place to see A through F, but basically you're correct. What I'm suggesting is that we freeze everyone's allocation at your current level. Now, new money then flows through the formula, and if you are a stellar performer, you get lots of the new money. If you are not a stellar performer, you stay frozen at your base. You're insured, and again, I'm holding out not a whole thought, so there's got to be more fleshed around it. But 4 years, 5 years from now, if you're not a stellar performer, you may still be frozen at the very same place that you are at today, while the other institutions are getting the bulk of the new money. The benefit to you is you're secured from losing. The downside is you're not going to get protections of some of these other pieces that we're eliminating. That's why I threw A, B, C, and F together and said, let's just take all of them off the table, add the G, come back in 3 years. Let's continue a conversation around non-resident student weighting and premium for underserved. But other than that, we go back to the fundamental operation of the formula, with the exception of no one drops below. Now, worst case scenario, a cut is imposed, and please, I hope and pray that's not the case. A cut is imposed. I think we have to have a discussion about how the cut is equally applied. I would suggest that we keep the frozen base so that as new funding comes back in post-cut, it levels everyone back up to the frozen point before we start running money through the formula. But those are lots of things we can talk about.
Senator Gibbons, this is Bill Payne. I've got a question. If you're wanting to freeze the base of the institutions, aren't you essentially saying let's go with a 0% stop loss? Because that essentially means you're not going to carve money out of the existing base of the institutions, which by definition means, unless there's a budget cut implemented or enacted by the General Assembly, that base funding would be their base funding, because you're not carving any funding out putting it in the performance fund for redistribution. So are you saying for the next 3 years, have a 0% stop loss, and let's put the onus on the General Assembly to fund the model, and it's the distribution of those new funds that would provide the incentive for institutions to perform at levels on given metrics at or above the sector average?
Bill, I want to say yes, but. I want to say yes, but. The yes is going to be for the year ahead at 0, provided there's no new money that goes in, because understand, we haven't written that budget for that next year yet. We'll see what happens. So yes, but. Now the 0 would be, let's game this out for a second. The 0 in my mind would be for 21 to 22. No 0, no negative number, no positive number for 21 going forward. A frozen level. You could call it a 0. But understand that in my mind, 21, 22, if we put in $40 million for 21, back up a second. We're in 2021 now. 21, 22, 0. 22, 23. We drop in $40 million. Okay, that 40 million flows through the formula. It doesn't raise anybody's base though. Their base is what that number is today. So if we come back in 22, 23, and we don't put new money in, there's no stop loss. So everyone puts in back down to their base. Their base would be what their number is today. And their base would forevermore be that number going forward. So any money they earn above that is always subject to going back through the formula. Does that make sense?
It really does to me. I understand. Actually, I think your proposal, I need to think about it in further detail, but eliminates a lot of the I won't call it complication, but it cleans everything up a little bit in my mind. It also, it seems it's a winner for, it won't be as much of a winner for some of you, I get that. But it takes us to a place whereby that we institutions can be incentivized from this point forward based on pure success, I guess, student success. So in many ways, this makes tons of sense to me. Now, I'm sure there's things I'm not looking at yet that I'm sure Bill will give me enough information to look at, but this proposal has a lot of merit on the surface to me.
Dr. Thompson?
Yes, Jay.
I wanted a minute maybe to partially respond to Senator Givens, because as you know, Morehead State University is a little bit challenged in the current model as it is written today. And I was actually a little intrigued as Senator Givens was kind of laying out his thoughts around this in concept. And I would like to put the caveat, I would like to see something on paper, but let me speak to the concept. You know, from Morehead State standpoint, we certainly would welcome, much like my other colleagues, new money to the formula. And I do understand that it is highly likely that my other colleagues will gain more money, and Morehead State University probably will not share in that if new money is put in the formula. However, what is very intriguing, Senator, if I heard you correctly, is that even though Morehead State would not be a winner with new money, this prevents us from being a loser. In under all other circumstances, at least that we've discussed to date, the institution that I represent is a loser. So for us, the intriguing part, if I heard you correctly, is this at least moves Morehead State University to a position of stability, even though we may not be a winner going forward with new money. So on the surface, Senator, this is very intriguing for us.
Senator Givens, I like the idea, and I like it for a handful of reasons. I think in terms of policy fidelity, it remains true to the original intent and keeps the model as it exists essentially for another 3 years. I think that's important anytime you're building policy to have a longer time horizon than just a couple, 3 years. And so give us some additional time to watch it perform. I think it removes some of the parochialism in the conversation. I mean, we're all charged with promoting and defending our institutions, and this does take that out of it a bit. And I think not causing harm was also part of the core values as this was originally created. So not hurting any institution, which I also support. I think it clarifies our message with the legislature. It's pretty simple what we're going to ask for all together, all on the same page. And I think it's a powerful ask. And I think the last part is that it continues to reward performance, and it does allow us to compete against one another just with a floor. I think when we come back to the conversation in 3 years or 2 years, if we were to get $40 million and money were to shift up and down and among institutions, I think making sure we remember this conversation then, if this is the direction in which we head, that, hey, I was a winner for 3 years and I lost this year, but that's okay because the model is doing what it's supposed to do. So I just want to put a marker on that so that in 3 years, people don't come back and say, well, I've lost in this model because money has been reallocated and shifted among institutions. It actually is performing the way we designed it to. It's just that there's a floor, and I like that too.
Tim, I think Chris has got his hand up. I just want to jump in and say, Jay, I don't know if your assertion is really correct. I think you would have a shot of getting new money under this model. When I look at your data, and I just went back to glance at it a few minutes ago, you probably would have performed well this last time out, and it would have gotten new money in that scenario, the way that this is based. So I wouldn't be so sure. I know we'll need to look at some scenarios. I get that. I wouldn't be so sure that you would not be able to partake in new money in this case. It looks like you actually would have done pretty good. So based on just the cursory glance, I may be wrong, but based on that glance. Chris, I know you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I want to. I try not to get too deep into it. I'm in the crosshairs on this one, but to certainly support what seems to be the model that Senator Givens has put out, and President Caboni has known me before Kentucky State, and my area is higher education policy, and so my policy mind versus my representing K-State mind is always at war. And I think, as President Caboni has said, what has been proposed does maintain the fidelity of the original performance funding plan. My challenge has remained, as I think I said at the last work group meeting, is that the guidelines of the model have been driving positive change on my campus. The fact that we are behind the 8 ball and with a 3-year rolling average cannot catch up as fast as others is the reality of the situation. But I am just as I think President Capilouto suggested, to game the model just for the benefit of Kentucky State. I think the model is laid out, has the right metrics for the Commonwealth. The fact that the institution is not winning is a secondary challenge. But I think what Senator Givens has proposed keeps us from tinkering with each of the varying levers of the model just to try to figure out what maximizes the best win for our campuses. It sets a new level playing field, sets a new reset button for every campus. And each campus has a base, equal or unequal as it may be. It has a known base on which it can plan and budget. And then each year we have to do our best work in each of the areas that the legislature has set forth to earn recognition in the performance model.
Thank you, Chris. Budget Director Hicks, I see your mic just turned off, so I know you're ready.
Yeah, thank you, Aaron. I wanted to first let me say, my biggest heartburn was what Senator Givens was addressing, which is to continue to reduce base budgets because there's no additional funding in the models, and so his idea resolves that as a base in perpetuity notion. What I wasn't clear in my connection, I think messed up a little bit, Senator Givens, is in the future period, let's say there's a 40 million pot that's allocated by the formula in a future budget. What I didn't hear completely is what about the budget after that? And there's another additional set of funds. I wasn't clear on hearing what then is the value being allocated by the formula. Is it the 40 million plus the additional amount that occurs in the subsequent budget? Is that what I heard?
Director Hicks, thanks for the chance to clarify. And I think the way I'll try to phrase this, and I may need Bill to help me to make sure I get it phrased correctly. I'm suggesting that there not be a stop loss. So going forward, 5 years from now, there's not a stop loss. There's a stop floor that you can't drop below. But let's game this out for a second. In the coming budget year, if we do $0 new dollars, in year 2, we do 40 million. That 40 obviously flows through, goes to the institutions. In year 3, with no stop loss except for that floor, everything above that floor, which is the 40 million that was put in year 2, gets put back in by the institutions in year 3 to flow through the formula. In year 4, we come back and do another 40 million. There would actually be 80 flowing through because the new 40 and the old 40 that we allocated all flow through. And so it reverts back everyone's contribution into the formula is whatever their allocation is minus their floor every year into perpetuity, unless we change it in 3 years.
Thank you. I thought that's what you had meant, but I appreciate the clarification. So it's don't lose your base, but you can lose some of your past winnings in this idea.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. No, and I want to just say that I like the fundamental of let's stop reducing the base budgets, in attempting to reward behavior, which is as President Capilouto says, I mean, there's an encouragement in here, and as President Thompson said, even with the reduced funding, we've some success here in terms of increasing number of graduates and a number of other degrees as well. So and I understand your no stop loss. Let's change our verbiage a little bit around that idea. I think that's helpful because I will say nobody outside the people in this cadre of post-secondary understands what stop loss means when it comes to post-secondary ed. So that I think that helps win over people to understand the formula better as well.
Okay, I'm going to play the devil, not the devil's advocate. Let me just play the devil for a minute. Let's say that I'm Chris Brown, even though he looks better than I do. Let's say that I actually have my base and I need to build the next time out, we get new funding. I get X amount of that funding and I put items in place that I need recurring funding for, like a better student support system or whatever, right? To help our students to be successful. But now I have to put that money back up the next time out. So I can see where some of this to build a student success, what I call a complete paradigm, would run into some snafus along the way. I love the idea of us having that floor that you're talking about setting. What I'm wondering is, have we thought about, Senator Givens, I know you and I have been going back and forth here a little bit, but I just thought about it as I think about building a student success system that's in place that would allow us to continue the improvement some may take, I mean, some of these may take recurring dollars that that in the past, that several of the institutions like Moorhead, KSU, and Murray may not have had going into this, even when they haven't lost any of their base so far yet. So do you understand my point?
I do, and I'll respond, and I want to pick on my suggestion as well. The more I think about it, I can find some holes to throw out too that we need to think about. Mandated programs probably create a little bit of a challenge. We often set those out. What do we do with regard to those as it relates to new money? Do we have a conversation around that? The other thing I don't like about my suggestion is potentially, at least for 1 year, as Eli said, performance comes off the table. That's the saddest part of the suggestion. And that same thing applies with a 0% stop loss. I think performance potentially comes off the table for a year. The hazard with my suggestion is that it comes off the table potentially for more than 1 year. Aaron, responding to your question, I would encourage each institution to be wise where they put that money. If you are investing in something that has an 85% probability of return on investment, you're probably going to be solid putting some of that winning there because you're going to build on your winnings. If it's got a 15% likelihood of a return in student performance, you're probably not going to put the money there. And honestly, you probably should never have put the money there to start with if it's only got a 15% return likelihood.
Well, first of all, I'm not surprised you answered that way. That's the way I would have responded to my question too. So, but I mean, but that is one of the things that will be raised. This is now about being strategic. If we do this, is what you're saying. And I think that's a fair way to answer that question. How are you, I'll pick on Eli here for a second. What UK has done and some of our other institutions, they decided to use some of their money to really help students be successful. A lot of times it's one-time money, even though they have it in a recurring pot based on the need-based aid or the things they need to get people through. And that has produced a return on investment as an example. So that was a very decent answer to a bad question, but I thought I'd pose it.
President Thompson, can I make a comment? This is Bill Payne. I just want to clarify something. Can you guys hear me? Am I off of mute?
You're good. Okay.
I think what I heard you say the first time, Senator Givens, you were talking about adding $40 million in new funding and that would be distributed. And then that same 40 million could be distributed again the next year. And then the same 40 million could be distributed the next year. And so it sounded to me like in your initial explanation, at no point would those funds have become recurring. But then in your second set of comments, I heard you say that there could be 40 million and then potentially, you know, the next time the General Assembly comes together to put together another biennial budget, there could be some additional new funding. And I thought it might be helpful just to clarify how the model has been operating to this point. If there had been $40 million put in the first year of the biennium, every institution would receive a direct appropriation in the budget bill from the General Assembly, and there would be $40 million put into the Post-Secondary Education Performance Fund. We would run the model in that first year, we would distribute that $40 million. But as we get ready to run the model in the second year of a biennium, that same 40 million could be still in the Post-Secondary Education Performance Fund. Every institution in that second year would still have their direct appropriation, which is that base funding level that you're talking about. And we'd run the model again, and we would distribute those funds. But the way the model has been functioning for this past 3 years, once you get into that second year of the biennium, and you run the model and you distribute those funds, what we have been doing has been, we've been coming back to the governor and to the General Assembly and requesting that those funds that were distributed in the second year of each biennium become recurring to the funds that earn those funds. And then we've been asking that the dollars in the performance pool be replenished in the first year of the new biennium. And so what we have been doing is we've been distributing the funds on a non-recurring basis in the first year of every biennium. And then in the second year, once we distribute those funds, we come back to the General Assembly and ask that those funds become recurring. And that is an important distinction, because unless those funds become recurring and provide a new base to the institutions that have earned those funds, then you never really are narrowing the gap and moving the institutions toward equilibrium with one another. If all it is a $40 million recurring pool that never gets distributed on a recurring basis to the institutions, you're just going to constantly distribute that same 40 million. You're never going to move the institutions toward equilibrium. And over time, one or two institutions might earn a larger and larger share of that 40 million every time you distribute it. But if every 2 years, when you distribute whatever's in that pool, we come back to the General Assembly and we say, you know, General Assembly, here were the direct appropriations for each institution. Here were the performance funding earnings for each institutions. We ask that that be the new base to start the new biennium. Then we would like to see that pool replenished with additional appropriations, if they're available, from the General Assembly. And that's what allows us over every 2 year period to distribute the funds in the first year non-recurring, and then distribute the funds in the second year with the hope that they will become recurring to the base. And that's what allows you to move the institutions toward funding parity. So that's how the model has been working.
Bill, great point, and that's why I'm so glad we're doing this in Sunday school all together, okay? Now, you and I have had this conversation multiple times, because that's a very confusing thing for me to try to explain to a lot of my colleagues in the General Assembly. And so I think that's a point we need clarity on. And I don't know that I'm crystal clear to say this is what it is, but here's what I'm thinking. And your point's well made. So let's use numbers again, because that works better for me. We're going to call year one the year ahead, which is 21-22, year two, and year three. And let's go ahead and just do a year four for sake of conversation. Let's presume year one is zero, new money. Year two is 40 million. And when I say year three is zero, in my mind, the General Assembly has already set a new allocation level of $40 million. So to clarify, I think year three has to be plus 40 above year one. Does that make sense?
It can be. It doesn't have to be. It could be the same 40 million just distributed in the first year on a non-recurring basis. Yes.
That's correct. It does not have to be, but I think post-secondary education will have a very solid argument in year three that you're cutting me again. You're cutting me again. We said we were through with the cuts. You're cutting me again. We committed to you, and you committed to us. Senator Givens committed to us, leveraging through this process of us drawing a floor that the General Assembly was going to support post-secondary education going forward. I can make the argument. Now, that's, to that point, that's why you saw us in the Senate. I think the House did something similar, because we talked with them. We didn't do 2 years of equal funding in our proposed budgets that never made it through the process. We did a step approach to try and be able to keep a floor that was growing. So both those proposed budgets had a step approach. My goal would be to see the 40 go in year two, 40 go in year three, and then if a 60 goes in year four, in my mind, that's 20 new on top of what the General Assembly has established as post-secondary funding. You are correct in that the year two 40 is contributed back by all the institutions to the pool for reallocation. The year three, they're going to push, well, the year two, they're not contributing back. The year three, they'd have to contribute it back, because they would have gotten it in year two. In year three, they're going to contribute it back plus a new 40. In year four, they would contribute back 80, with 60 from the state flowing through that formula. But that's something we can talk about. And I'm not expecting, I haven't thought about this enough to have all these answers, but I'm I'm thinking we've got something that seems to have some amount of consensus, but we certainly haven't heard from Eli or from University of Louisville. I'm not sure who's on now. And I would expect there's going to be some pushback there from the two of them, and I would fully expect that.
Senator Gibbons, I apparently didn't make myself as clear in my first explanation. I thought the main point I was trying to make is that the best solution would be new funding, which is what you proposed. It takes these other things off the table that I think start a sequential weakening of the model. You know, we keep nibbling at it. So I feel very good about what you proposed. And as you've asked yourself about the nuances of it, I'll be curious too. I want to ask Bill Payne this question because I think it's important to recognize that embedded within all these calculations is something else. In some ways, we're measured against ourselves in improvement. I'll tell you, the University of Kentucky would like to get to a 70% graduation rate. Out of 4,500 universities, there are only 150 in the country that are at that level. But, you know, once you approach that, your gains start getting harder and your room to improve is a little less. Sure, we'd like to go to 90%, but, you know, there's some realities to these things. So in some ways, your successes get a little limited, and that's in the model too. And those that have a longer stretch may have, you know, relatively speaking, better gains to achieve. So that's a sort of healthy thing in preserving the model. The only thing I think you said, Senator Gibbons, early on, and I ask it as a clarification, it's important to the University of Kentucky, I won't speak for the University of Louisville, that we keep these weighting of the sectors as we have it, because what that embedded into the model is some recognition of all the things we do outside of undergraduate education. The model is driven by undergraduate education, and the professional education, the research we conduct and all, I thought was recognized in our weighting. So Bill, maybe correct me if I'm wrong on some of those assumptions.
No, that's absolutely correct, President Capilouto. There was a recognition not only of differences in mission between the research campuses and the comprehensive universities, but a recognition of differences in cost structures. UK and U of L compete in a national, if not global, marketplace for their faculty. The two research campuses are trying to recruit renowned faculty that have active research agendas that hopefully are going to bring federal research dollars with them when they come to UK or to U of L, and bring staff that helps them with their research. And all of that has a cost component to it. You've already mentioned the professional schools. I added a slide or two in this presentation for today. UK and U of L combined produce about 50% of the master's degrees and over 90%, well, excuse me, let me flip to that slide, make sure I'm getting my statistics correct here. 81% of doctoral degrees and first professional degrees. And you're absolutely correct. That's not rewarded in terms of the degree production component in the model. Only bachelor's degree production is rewarded. It is accounted for somewhat in that earned credit hour component,
Right.
but not in terms of the student success metrics related to degree production. And so all of that factored in addition to the fact you've already seen a couple of meetings ago, back in 2016, the differential between the two research campuses and the comprehensive universities in terms of the funding per FTE. Well, the research campuses back then, even before we implemented the model, already had more funding per FTE than the comprehensive institutions. So that differential was already in place. So the only thing the weighting between the sectors did was to say, you know what, UK and U of L have a certain amount of general fund support already in their base. The comps collectively as a group have a certain amount of general fund support in their base. And let's calibrate this model. So in the first year that we run it, you're not going to have the research campuses distributing tens of millions of dollars to the comprehensive sector, or have this comprehensive sector shifting tens of millions of dollars to the research sector. And so we took each sector where you were and said, what you've got is what you've got. That's water under the bridge. Let's start this model out with the two sectors at equilibrium with one another. And then as we move forward, it's the change in performance at the sector level and at the institutional level that's going to, determine how this funding is going to shift. So that's a long-winded answer to your question. But yes, and all of this was discussed 3 years ago. And this is one of those areas of negotiation and compromise that all of the presidents and the elected leaders that were on that working group and the state budget director at the time reached consensus around.
One of the, sorry, Bill, were you done?
Yeah, I'm done.
Okay. I was on that group, as you all may remember, way back when, and I argued for sector differentials. And at that time, I lost that battle because of what Bill just explained. I know many of the campuses now would like to see that again in many ways. I am clearly agnostic a little bit on that. What I'm not agnostic on, I think, is the way we are producing what we need to do for the state. And I don't want to leave that, I don't want to not put that in there because I think it is important. As we look at what we've done as an example of 17.5% of the credentials, I hadn't heard from Paul Zarapata yet, but 17.5% increase in credentials overall and 37% increase in credentials of our URM. If we dissect that, disaggregate that, that tells us a story about our success and maybe some places we can actually improve. The point I'm trying to make is that if we could get to some reasonable consensus that allows somebody to have something, as we did 3 years ago, allow everybody to have something, then I know that I am for that. I argued heavily for the URM. If it was left up to me, I'd double that today. I argued heavily for the low income. I would even argue if we were throwing another variable in heavily for an adult learner because I'm looking at what's needed for the state. I guess my question comes to play is, and I know most of the comprehensives would have liked to have seen a sector change or a sector division in this time around. I guess, is that a conversation we need to bring to this now, or have we brought it and come to a consensus on where we're at?
Aaron, I'll jump in and say that, again, at the risk of the challenges and complexity we face, I, for one, certainly I know many of us around the table were not present at the previous time. And I think based a little bit on what both Eli and Bill Payne just shared, I think it's something worth looking into. I absolutely recognize the difference between missions and outcomes that our research institutions are doing. Just this morning when we were having conversations about the spring semester, we talked about the medical schools and so on and so forth. So clearly there are differences. Eli made a very good point a few minutes ago about the peer benchmark of 70% graduation rate, which UK is aspiring to. That 70% benchmark, which probably very few institutions have, is based on a certain group of peer institutions. I would submit that perhaps very few, if any, of the ASCU institutions of which all of us are members really are at that level. And so the question about what is our benchmark and peer becomes a question. I would really like to spend a little bit more time on this. I know this is probably an exhausting topic, and I want to certainly examine that. I thought the senator mentioned removing the weights as part of the proposal. I'm not so sure if I caught that or not.
That's correct, yes.
And I was curious as to what that would do.
when I say removing the weights, in my mind, I was eliminating a conversation around A, B, C, and eliminating a conversation around weighting between sectors. So things were going to stay the way they are with regard to what I thought I was proposing.
Right. Okay. I understand that. I think so. To your question, Aaron, I just, again, this is a question of what can be accomplished in a short period of time. My hope would be that we can agree to some sort of general sense of where things are along the lines of, I'm going to call it the Senator Givens proposal, which can be fine-tuned as we all reflect on it a little bit. I would still like to keep the option open of revisiting this idea of what does it do if we actually do have a way to either modify those weights or think about mission-specific outcomes and so on and so forth, and think about those differently. So, and I don't expect that to all happen in the short period of time that we do that.
And this is David at EKU. I think that Senator Givens' proposal also, as Bill highlighted, as we started from 3 years ago, some of those cost structures associated with the R1s would be baked into the floor of those institutions, just like they're baked into the floor for the comprehensive. So I think the conversation would lead into, for new funds, could we have a discussion about those metrics and those weightings, and perhaps that's a discussion for another day. But I think that as we think about total public funds, as it impacts the institutions, we understand that there's a desperate need for investment in higher education. We know there's a desperate need for investment in graduate and research activities that go on at the R1 institutions. I do think it's a conversation worth having, but I don't think it's worth slowing down the momentum of the work that's going on here. So
I agree with that. I think that because of time, Senator Givens, I think you may have an idea that is simple, explainable, predictable, and we can budget for if there's some type of base and add to the base. I would ask if Bill is there some way to run some scenarios that we can look at very quickly? Because I think Senator Givens has an excellent point, and we can move forward, and we don't have a lot of time.
I think a key critical, let me jump in with two quick things. One of those is I would really like to see us change the name from the Senator Givens proposal to anything but that.
Aaron Thompson sounds good,
Let's call it the Aaron Thompson proposal. I like that a lot better.
Yeah. Sunday school.
Sunday school, great. In all seriousness, one of the things that has to happen if we move forward with something like this, though, is we have to use some very clear messaging, but subtle. Maybe I'm the one that can say it pointedly. Representative Tipton, because he launched the idea really with this interplay question that he raised. Maybe he and I are the ones that can say it pointedly, but all of you need to be able to message it very subtly that this is all about leveraging the General Assembly for new money. As Aaron said, you've done your part. Now it's time for the General Assembly and the state to do their part, and this is a reflection of that.
By the way, I do appreciate that. We will come up with a suitable name. There's a lot of merit in this proposal, to be honest with you, that cleans a lot of stuff up for several years. The point I'll make, and I want to open it up again, because I think we've given Bill some work to do for the next time around to run some scenarios around this. But I guess I just want to point out the metrics are working. I mean, they are. And I think about Eli, since you and I were probably the only two that was on that group other than Senator Givens. Representative Tipton, I don't even think you were on that group then. I mean, when we looked at it, we obviously bought into it that we were going to have funding to put in it, new funding. But we also looked at what was good for the state. You may remember, Eli, we talked about that more than anything else, how we could move the state agenda forward. And we came up with what we thought was a simplistic way of thinking about degrees. Yes, parsing out those items that we knew that were important around STEM, URM, and low income. I just want to say this is working, as Chris Brown said, and I fully appreciate that, Chris. Since you haven't gotten any new money in the process, that still makes the statement that I think is powerful. So I guess I would want us to make sure whatever we come up with, David, as you said, let's come up with something, David McFadden I'm talking about here, let's come up with something that we know that everybody still has an opportunity of winning, while at the same time harnessing the General Assembly around the idea of putting funding into higher ed once again at the level that it takes us to keep this moving. So I'm going to ask us to really hone in on this proposal that we'll call, I don't know, John Hicks proposal. I don't know, we'll make up some good name. But let's think about that for a second and see if there's any more tweaks we need to ask questions around until we get Bill to run some stuff for us. That's one thing. Number two, are there any other items that we want to bring to the table today in addition to this proposal?
President Thompson, this is John. Somewhat in response to the comment that Bill made about moving to equilibrium. And when I say that we've got a formula here that has some conflicting goals, that's part of what I mean. That's not a criticism. It's just that it's more graduates and equity in per student, don't always align with one another. But you're attempting to kill both birds. So anyway, I wanted to toss that out. Just one quick idea based upon Senator Givens' kind of rolling increase pot of performance funding is one idea would be to have some element that permits those lower than equity to retain a piece of those winnings rather than throwing them all back in the pot. And that way you move toward equilibrium in a positive way, and you don't put a higher bar in the way of other institutions who have a higher per student, and you let them hit what President Capilouto says is the encouragement for more graduates. So because I see a negative effect in the current formula, and I'd like to move like the base plus to a positive effect.
President Thompson. This is Rick Ray-Sarek from University of Louisville. And as you heard, President Bendapudi had to step away for a bit. But we did get a chance to confer after Senator Givens, your proposal, and really like the idea as well. I think there's a lot of stability to that proposal that might not exist under the current model. And to President Thompson's earlier comment about increasing the weighting on underrepresented minorities and low-income students, that's actually something that President Bendapudi feels very strongly about and has advocated for that, I think, over the past couple of months as the work for this body has kind of moved along. So I think to whatever level that we can do something like that, that does drive a lot of positive metrics in the model and for the university. So we would highly support that. And then real briefly to President Capilouto's comment about the weighting of by students. And we do support the current structure for that, and for some of the same reasons that Bill had talked about, and hope that can continue into whatever version the new model is.
President Thompson, this is Representative Tipton. I appreciate all the conversation. I learned a long time ago, you learn a lot more by listening than talking. And one thing I have learned, it's always good to have Senator Givens in the room in my time in the General Assembly. But we don't have to name it the Givens proposal. But I'm just thinking back to the 17 session. I just came into this role and had 2 or 3 meetings with the senator, and he kind of tutored me on how to present this in the House. And one of the things that we talked about then, we would eventually be at 100% performance-based funding. Some people questioned that at that time. I heard some questions about that. In essence, we're going away from 100% performance-based funding. We're establishing a new base, and the percent of performance base would be however much the General Assembly will allocate in the future. I think that's a pretty accurate statement there. If not, somebody can certainly correct me. I also think it's a fair statement to say the likelihood of funding in their next one-year budget, increased funding, is possibly unlikely. Director Hicks may have a better feel on that, where we're still waiting on numbers. We've got two uncertainties. We don't know exactly how this COVID economy is going to recover over time. And there's one other wild card I'm going to throw out there from an A&R perspective. The teachers' retirement system is currently doing an experience study. And depending on the new assumptions they put in that experience study, the Commonwealth could be facing a very large increase in funding to that system. So we've got some challenges out there, but I like this approach. And I think it's just basically what we're doing is you're putting it on the General Assembly that if you want to see these outcomes, you're going to have to put money into it. And I think that's the way we need to present this to the General Assembly. We can show them the benefits that we have. If we want to reach this 60 by 30 goal, if we want to increase our economy through educating our population, we've got to invest in it.
Thank you, Representative Tipton. I'm going to call on Paul Ziapata, but I will say, though, that is true, Representative Tipton, from this point forward, if we go with this proposal. I just want to say the last 3 years, we did have money put into it from the campuses that created this other base that we have now. So there's been 3 years of distribution of dollars from the campuses. And in some of those cases, there were cuts in addition to that. So one of the reasons why I like this proposal is because it takes that in recognition too. It's not just what we're doing to move forward, it's taking into account of what is taking place, not just in performance, but really with skin in the game. I guess I just did want to throw that in. Paul, I know you've had your hand up for a minute, sir.
Yes, I'll echo what many have said already. I think KCTCS would be in strong support of this. It just makes a lot of sense, and I don't see much downside to it.
Thank you. Other questions? I do want to say once again, recognition that I've had a chance to talk offline with everybody, including the elected officials here and including John. All of you, and I will tell you just off the record, have said the same thing, that, you know, higher education is the key to our success, and we've suffered enough cuts. So I appreciate that. I understand, Representative Tipton, we may not have new money in, but your recognition of that and some of the conversations we've had about targeting even better strategic outputs has been very beneficial, at least to me in this role. So I guess I want to just open it up more to what's on the table now, and if we'd like that, run the scenario, and if there's other tweaks we may want to look at to come back next time with something a lot more solid to make a decision on. Wow, you may have actually dropped the mic, Senator Gibbons, even though you don't want to take credit for it.
So Aaron, will we get some information between now and the next meeting with some scenarios on it?
Can you do that, Bill?
I can run some scenarios fairly quickly, but I need to understand the parameters and assumptions around, you know, the scenario that we're talking about. And I'll just, and semantics comes into play here. For example, I heard somebody say, you know, we would like to have no stop loss. Well, and you know, what that means to me, that vernacular would indicate that you take $584 million, that's the current year revised net general fund of the university sector, and all of those funds would go into the post-secondary education performance fund because there's no stop loss. And what would remain in the direct appropriation of each institution is just their mandated program funding. So, you know, that use of that term, you know, I would need to clarify. Because to me, when if you're saying, well, we don't want to carve money out of the institutions to put into the performance fund, every institution would keep their current year base in their direct appropriation. To me, that's the same thing as saying you want to have a 0% stop loss, which means let's don't carve any money out of the base of the institutions. Let's let them keep that base. And so there would be no institutional funds put into the post-secondary education performance fund. And then the onus would be on the General Assembly to try to put new dollars into the performance fund. And so it's those kinds of details that I would need to work through. And also that notion of, you know, we're going to distribute the funding on a non-recurring basis going forward, or is there at some point every couple of years, are you going to make the earned funds recurring and then refill the pot with additional state general fund appropriations? Some of those kind of details I would need to work through with somebody, perhaps Senator Givens, in order to be able to run the scenarios that you're talking about.
Bill, now's a good time for you and I to step out in the hall of Sunday school. I don't know that I can answer all these questions in front of everybody else. I think I do understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
And I do think whether we call it a zero stop loss or we call it a floor, it has the same meaning.
Yes.
Institutions would not be putting earned money into the pool, but the earned money is solely the dollar amount they have per institution today. 4 years from now, they will have earned money, and they will put that earned money minus their floor into the pool, along with any general fund monies that have flowed in over that period of time.
Yeah, okay. So it sounds like what you're proposing is to give institutions some new state general fund, which would then become their stop loss contribution going forward. And so they would keep putting those dollars back into the pool, maybe with some additional state funds, and then the new pool would be distributed every year.
That's right. So your number 584, that 584 number would be written in stone. And then 7 years from now, if we're at 884, there would be 300 that would be in the pool for allocation. Certainly, we will have come back and taken another look at it by then, but you follow what I'm saying?
Yes, I do. Okay.
And Bill, I have an idea of what I'd like to see, Ron. I'll just give you a quick one. Is to take the premise that everybody's money is where it's at now and run a scenario of 20 million, 40 million, and so on, using how it was distributed last time, so people get an idea of what that looks like. That's one. I'm also interested, based on a couple of emails I just got, whether or not if we, let's say, increase the low income and underrepresented by X% more and see what that looks like and so on. So those are a couple ideas that I like to see ran based on institutional input, so everybody has an opportunity to see what it would look like at that point in time. Am I making sense?
Yes, and one last point of clarification. The starting point in the first year to run the scenario would be that there is some new state dollars put into the performance fund, no institutional funds put in there because we now have a new floor. Those funds would be distributed to the institutions, but then the first year of the new biennium, let's say there's 20 million put into the performance fund for next year. Those funds get distributed on a non-recurring basis because that 20 million is still in the pot in the first year of the next biennium, and then we add additional general funds to the 20 million and distribute that. Is that a good starting point for these scenarios, Senator Givens?
I think that is. I think the other thing, Bill, you could do briefly is answer Director Hicks' question earlier regarding us moving to equilibrium and what this would do. We haven't quite gotten there yet, but we're closer than we were when we started. But help answer that for me as well.
Well, and that's absolutely a decision on the part of this body. But currently we have no mechanism once the General Assembly within a biennium says here's a direct appropriation to the universities and KCTCS, a direct appropriation for each institution in the first year. Here's a direct appropriation for each institution in the second year. In the first year, when we distributed the performance funds, those don't get rolled into the base somehow, because when you get into the second year of the biennium, the General Assembly has directed CPE that every institution has a direct appropriation. And that's that floor, that base that they often count on. The only decision is, do those funds continually, as the universities and KCTCS put their dollars back into the pool and the General Assembly may add to that pool, do those funds going forward always get distributed on a non-recurring basis? Or every 2 years, there's the opportunity, if the General Assembly chooses to do so, to say any funds that were earned in the second year, we're going to say that becomes the new beginning base or the new floor to start the next year. And now we're going to add dollars to the pool. You understand?
I don't like that. I don't like that part. I think if we're going to, in my mind, if we're going to say, here's the package, then the package is you get the benefit of no risk in the short term, but you do risk in the long term. And I'm not a fan of us resetting the floor and starting to do that over time.
Well, that's all. I have perfect clarity now. I know what to do. So we're good. And is it, President Thompson said, let's try like maybe 20 million in the first year, which would be the 2021 fiscal year. And then add an additional 20 million. And then of course, we're putting that same 20 million that was available in the first year. So there would be 40 million in the second year. Do you
Let's do this, Bill? Bill, sorry to interrupt you, but reflecting on what Representative Tipton said, the first year is going to be 21-22, right?
Yes.
First year, 21-22, let's do 0.
Okay.
Year 2, which will be that next year, then do a 20, and then in year 3, do a 40.
And is the 40 in the second year the original 20
Plus
the
20.
First, and then plus 20. A new 20? Okay.
That's right. And that's something we've got to nail down the semantics on so that we're all communicating clearly. So that's why I said the staggered approach, 20 in 2, 40 in 3, and then for the sake of interest and execution, do a 0. Do a 0 in 4. So a 0, a 20, a 40, and a 0. And this in no way indicates what I expect the General Assembly to do. All we're doing is running scenarios.
I'd like to make one other comment. Again, and applaud everybody for the progress we're making. And that gets back to the sort of fidelity of the model. Starting to reweight things and see how they come out. I know, for instance, in terms of underrepresented minority graduates, we've had a constant ascent, and I'm not worried about reweighting those. It's thanks to a lot of caring people turning lots of levers. We've had success there. I worry about we're opening the door again to see what it all looks like, and I don't even know what it looks like, but I think we start going back to where we've been the last several meetings, and that is, what does it mean for my university? And I think we've made great progress with the new money as a stronger tack to take if we're going to start opening the model back up. Not sure exactly what that does to our progress, but I like the progress we made today. I wouldn't want to detract from.
And Eli, let me be clear about that statement. I like what we've done so far too. So we don't have to run that scenario it was just something I've gotten from several folks, Louisville and some other people that asked us to take a look at that. And I was just looking at it under the premise of the new conversation we're having around that. I'm never going to argue against myself on seeing the need to actually increase the low income underrepresented. You know, I won't do that. But for the sake of simplicity, if everybody's where they're at and we can get to some reasonable agreement, I am by no means suggesting that we upset that apple cart with that suggestion. How are we in agreement that this is the direction we want to go and have Bill run those and come back, and we can get those to you probably ahead of time before December 2nd. I'm sure we can. A little thing called Thanksgiving, but Bill likes to work during Thanksgiving anyway. That's what he does. No, but are there any other statements or questions or thoughts around this? We'll also come up with some nomenclature. Senator Givens, Representative Tipton, if I heard what you said, and I think even Budget Director Hicks said this, that some of the nomenclature we use, like stop loss, has created some consternation among some people. So the idea of using floor may be a better term or some other term along those lines. Am I correct in some of this?
Yes, I do think so.
So the other thing we'll do too is think a little bit about, if we get an agreement on this, a name that indicates what I call a futuristic look at what we're doing in higher education with this. So we'll look at all of that. Are there any other items to bring to this group? There's a chance we may get done early, which I'm a little bit shocked. Bill, I'm going to let you, is there anything we've missed so far?
Well, I do just have one question, and this has to do with the nomenclature issue. And I like the idea of using the term floor as opposed to stop loss. And of course, the statute says that stop loss and hold harmless provisions will sunset. It doesn't use the exact term sunset, but you know, those provisions will go away unless there's action by the General Assembly. Well, in my mind, when it's talking about a hold harmless provision, that was what was implemented in the first year of the phase-in, which it was essentially the same thing as a 0% stop loss, but that's what the hold harmless provision referred to. And of course, stop loss provisions pertain to the 1% and the 2% each of the next 2 years. But we have been calling something a hold harmless allocation when we run the funding model. And I wonder if we ought to give that a new label so that it's not confused with the hold harmless provision. And I haven't come up with that label yet, but basically what we are calling the hold harmless allocation are the dollars that if it were not for, in the past, it's been the stop loss. If not for the stop loss, or going forward, if not for the floor, the model would say that KSU should contribute $6.8 million, which should be distributed to other institutions. Moorhead should contribute $2.8 million, which should be distributed to other institutions. But since we're now going to have this floor, those dollars would stay in the base of those institutions and be protected. But in the formula, they would still be calculated as negative numbers that are in the base of those institutions that are not going to be redistributed. And so I would just suggest that we give what in the past we have called a hold harmless allocation a new label, because right now the statute says that hold harmless and stop loss provisions go away, but those dollars that are calculated in the formula that each institution gets to retain in their base, because we now have the floor and those dollars are not going to be redistributed, I would just like to come up with a new name, and I'll bring that for consideration of this group at the next meeting.
But I would say that in what the legislature's thinking about doing, we probably don't need to think about that part anyway, because now we will have a floor, won't we? Why would we need to even mention those other numbers ever again, I guess?
I don't think I need to mention it unless somebody wants to get, you know, down at the 100-foot level into the detail of how we calculate, you know, the distribution. And I know that you have an interest in that, President Thompson, but some of the others on this call might not be as interested as you are.
We can call this Bill's pain.
Aaron, this is Ashish. I know, can I put just one request for consideration? I know there's a lot going on, and as you mentioned, there's this little thing called Thanksgiving next week, and it's a tight timeline. If there was a way to get us some draft notes based on today's conversation that we could reflect on, it would be helpful. We got some really you know, intriguing, and I think I agree with everyone saying we've made some good progress. It just would help me reflect more if there was a way to get, and I completely understand there would be very drafty notes, but if something could be sent out the early part of next week, gives certainly some of us an opportunity to reflect on that and offer some additional thoughts, hopefully well before the second.
I think we can do that. I think between Sean and Bill and Heather and everybody else, I think we'll be able to do exactly that. I'd rather get something to you sooner rather than later while it's fresh, because we are coming to an end here fairly soon. I would say that this is a substantial movement and improvement, and I think it's healthy in the discussions we've had. I understand not everybody is getting every single thing they ever thought about wanting to get, but I do like the idea of creating I started to say a marriage, but I'll say a commitment, if you will, between us and the legislature on seeing the importance of what we're trying to do in higher education and helping all of our institutions to be successful in the process. I had a chance to be on a Moody's call. They asked me to represent Kentucky because of some of the healthy conversations we are having around this, to talk about what it means for higher education to be healthy financially to support the needs of the state. And I think I wish they had had a chance to see some of this conversation. I think they would have probably appreciated it. So anyway, I told them y'all were this good, just to let you know. But are there any other statements to bring to this group?
Just a question and perhaps a suggestion. Senator Givens, would you like for me and my staff to try to draft a concept paper, if you will, a one-pager that we can send to you and that you can edit before we send it out to the group?
I'd like to look at it. I certainly won't edit without conversation with you. But you're talking about an algorithm decision tree sort of, yes, that'd be helpful.
Okay, and Heather, I assume you've got Senator Givens' email address, correct? And don't give it to me, you know, on a public Zoom call, but if you do, then I'll be able to correspond with Senator Givens.
Yes, I have it, and I should be able to also take some notes for you guys. Or Ryan Kaffenberger takes really detailed notes. We'll be able to get those summarized into you guys soon.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you, everyone. If there's nothing else to bring to the table, we hope you stay safe. Once again, appreciate all that y'all are doing around this COVID and what you're doing with your students, faculty, and staff. Appreciate all the folk that took part in today's meeting on a Friday afternoon. I hope you enjoy your Thanksgiving. Please understand you can ship me food. Eli, I look forward to opening my house to you next week, sir. Have a good one, folks, and I'll talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.